Hey there, good morning. Today, I want to talk about how to use art effectively when you are using play therapy. So, I have been using play therapy for the last 30 years, um, working with children and adolescents. And there are a few things that I've noticed over that time that can either help the process along or hinder it along the way. And so that's really what I want to talk about today is just some tips to help you be more effective when you're using art in the play therapy process. And some of the things that I have learned along the way. So if you are joining me today, I would love to know who's here. Go ahead and post your name in the comments, where you're from, what population that you work with, what are your questions about using art, what are your questions about play therapy. Go ahead and post those in the comment, and I'm going to play my handy dandy music, which always makes me laugh. So I'll be right back. So that's a little wake up for the morning. It is 7 a.m. where I am here in the US on the West Coast. So let's see who's here. Hi, Eileen. So what are some of the tips for using art in play therapy? And so I've been in the mental health field for 30 years, working with children, adolescents, and families, and was introduced to play therapy back in the 80s when I was working as a special education teacher. So I've really understood the value of using play therapy with children. And now I really enjoy kind of teaching others and helping the next generation of play therapists, child and adolescent therapists coming up to really learn how to use this powerful modality in a really effective way and to use it confidently. And so over those last 20 years with play therapy specifically being trained in play therapy, you as a registered play therapist in that journey, there are some of the things that I've learned. One of them is my love for neuroscience and attachment theory. And so over the years of, most of us use an integrated approach when we're using play therapy. And so in my mind, I thought, well, if you're using an integrated approach, we still need to be grounded in some kind of theoretical model. So it's important to do that. And what I found is, as I kind of looked back over it and kind of thought about it, as I was preparing for some trainings and trying to help new play therapists coming up, I thought, well, what's going to make sense? Because I love a good framework. To me, a good framework helps me navigate the treatment, decision making, that clinical decision making process. And so when I thought about neuroscience and attachment, what I came to realize is that it really does give a really good framework to ground the work that you're doing with your clients, because I really do believe it's important to be grounded in theory because theory drives application. And even when we're using an integrated approach, we're still thinking about those theoretical models. That's one of the things that I really like about prescriptive play therapy is that model. It really highlights the importance of grounding your work, whatever intervention you're using, in a theoretical model, because theory does drive application. And so neuroscience and attachment theory provided some really good um, foundational aspects, even when using art in play therapy. And so I came up with this framework. It's called the B5 framework. It's really about a way of being in the session and your way of being as a therapist in the session, as that includes your decision making. So using the B5 framework, what I've found really kind of helps to ground the work that you're doing, helps to ground the way that you're present in the session and the way that you are thinking about what's going on in the session. So to me, that's kind of the secret sauce to ground your work, is using that neuroscience and attachment lens. And the B5 framework is really your way of being, which is be fully present. So we know from the work that Daniel Siegel has done that when you're fully present, you are really able to tap into your resonance circuits effectively. So those resonance circuits are the way in which you're using your mirror neurons to connect, even physiologically, in this case with the client in your session. So you're tuning into them, so you have that attunement with your client, you're reading their cues, you're really getting a sense of what's going on both verbally as well as non-verbally, because you're really kind of picking up on their emotions, you're picking up on the words that you're using, their behavior, and really tuning in to get a really good sense of what's going on with them. To do that, you have to be really intentional about being fully present in that session with them. So that's be fully present. Also, the other thing is be accepting. This is one of the things that I love. I kind of also learned along the way with DBT. I love DBT. For those of you, I think most people have heard of it. DBT, it stands for dialectical behavior theory. And the thing about a dialectic is two things can be true at the same time. So one of the foundational dialectics of DBT is it can be both true that my client is doing the best that he or she can at this moment in time, and he or she can also always do better. So we're doing the best that we can, and we can do better. So with clients, being fully accepting in that moment is, and actually being accepting of clients, is they are doing the best that they can in that moment in time, in that session. My client is doing the best that he or she can. And part of the change process is they can do better. So being accepting where they are in that moment, creating that unconditional positive regard, that free and protected space. Being accepting, though, doesn't mean that you're not setting limits, because setting limits protects that therapeutic relationship. This is even something we use in child-centered play therapy. We want to protect the room, we want to protect the toys, and we want to protect the child. So safety is always going to be important, including the personal limits of the therapist. Like if you have a boundary and you just cannot tolerate certain things, like I set the limit. You can see my sand tray miniatures in the background. I set a limit that you cannot destroy my miniatures. Like you cannot take your hand. I get asked this all the time in sand tray trainings. You cannot knock them down. You cannot throw them. In my playroom, this is a limit that I set because I want to be accepting of my clients and be able to be fully present with them. So being accepting does not mean that you don't set limits. You can absolutely set limits. Just be mindful of the limits that you're setting and make sure it's therapeutic in nature, because setting limits about some of those rules that I have for the playroom protects the relationship. This is true in all relationships. Boundaries protect the relationship. So the other thing is be playful. This is where those therapeutic powers of play come in, being playful in the session, accessing those therapeutic powers of play using art and through that therapeutic space in there, because one of the therapeutic powers of play is establishing therapeutic rapport, establishing and maintaining and strengthening that relationship, the attachment relationship, social relationships, if you're doing like a group therapy. So, being playful is the way to connect. And it's also a way that you're focused on helping your client access those therapeutic powers of play. The other is be curious. Being curious means that just kind of your way of being is curiosity, open to the possibilities of what can happen. That will also help you not to go into kind of getting it in your mind about this means that, and it's always going to be that, making judgments about what's going on in the session. We want to be open to the possibilities of what's going on in that session and using curiosity, even the way in which you're exploring with your client what's going on in their sessions. So I'm curious for you, how many of you guys are actually using art in your play therapy sessions? How many of you are using neuroscience and attachment in your sessions? If there's any other neuroscience nerds out there in play therapy, I always like connecting and hearing what you're doing. I think, and then finally, the last thing to be mindful of is be aware. So be aware of what theoretical model you're using. Be aware of your body language and what that's communicating. Be aware of what your client's body language is and what they're communicating, that body positioning, where they're sitting, proximity to you. Are they sitting far away? Do they have their back turned to you? Are they sitting close? Are they chatting and interacting with you? Are they quiet and fully intent and focused on what they're doing? It's not good or bad. This is all information that we're taking in, and we're kind of using it to get to know your clients and the way in which they work. You are listening to the words that they use. You're mindful of the words that you're using in the session, and also your client's responses to you. All of those nonverbal things that go on give you really good information to better understand your client and what's going on and some of their personality um, characteristics, and um, also their responses to you, to pick up on any shifts, because we will notice that in the sessions as well, which gives you good information. And then also, the theoretical model that you're using, you want to make sure that you're applying that the way in which it's supposed to be applied. So you want to use that awareness of what is going on in that session. To do that, you got to be fully present in the session and using some curiosity, some playfulness, and some acceptance, because that all of that creates that free and protected space. So when you're using this kind of a framework, then you can create and maintain that therapeutic art making process, and um, use that throughout the session. It'll also kind of help you as you're tuned into your clients. You'll kind of get a sense of what's working, what's not working, slow it down, speed it up, what works well, what doesn't work well. So that's kind of the framework to use art and a way to create and maintain that safe therapeutic space. So that here there are three questions that I get asked all the time when I'm doing play therapy trainings, especially when I'm using art or using Sandtray. Like I have my Sandtray miniatures in the background. And so there are three questions I get asked all of the time. And these were kind of a big motivator for me to create a training to go much more in depth using art effectively. How do you recognize themes? That was a previous episode that I did, and I go in much more in depth, and we practice in the training. So I have a training coming up. I'll talk more about that at the end. It's called Integrating Art into Play Therapy with Children and Teens. So that's a live webinar that I have coming up. And one of the things that I get asked a lot is, how do you recognize themes? Themes are important because they give you clinical information that's going to help you understand what you need to do with your decision making about where they are, where they are in the treatment process. What do you need to do? But the other questions I get asked a lot are, how do you introduce the art making process to your clients? And that really is going to uh, be dictated by what theoretical model you're using. So if you're using child-centered play therapy, then you're not introducing it because you're following your client's lead. And if you are giving a directive prompt, then they're leading. I mean, you're leading, they're not leading. um, Hey, Jody, how are you? That's awesome. So, Jody, if you are not familiar, Jody and I connected on LinkedIn, and Jody does these amazing mindfulness painting uh, classes in the Northern Virginia area. So, if you are in the Northern Virginia area, you definitely want to connect with Jody. Those always look so cool. I'm so glad you're joining today, Jody. Um, so the way in which you introduce the art is going to be predominantly based on your model that you're using. So if you're using more of a directive approach or a play therapy approach that allows for the therapist to be in the directing mode, then you can use different prompts. And when you're thinking about different prompts to create something with art, then you want to think about, what do you want to accomplish? Still, if you're even when you're doing directive, you're still holding the possibilities, you're still using curiosity, you're still tuning in. And one of the prompts is really to give a little direction and see what the client does with it. And here's what I say to my clients all the time, even when I give them a directive, because sometimes a directive prompt um, kind of shuts them down. They go into, how do I do this perfectly? Am I doing it the right way? It's kind of reminding them of art class where they have certain things they have to accomplish because they're getting graded on things. Um, in the playroom, though, because we're accessing those therapeutic powers of play, really I can give a directive. And then I tell my clients, you know what? There's no wrong way to do this. However you do it is just perfect. It'll be the way it needs to be. Because when I give a directive, it's really just to provide a little guidance about what I'm thinking we need to explore, and it might not be what my client needs to do. So that's where I need to be open to the possibilities and allow them to create what they need to create. Because the prompt in and of itself will kind of generate some ideas, it'll generate an internal response, and then they're going to create whatever it is they need to create. Because ultimately, that's the purpose. Ultimately, the purpose is to use art so that your client can access those therapeutic powers of play from a play therapy standpoint, and then do whatever it is they need to do to work through whatever it is they need to work through. One of the things that I often hear when I'm doing supervision, because I'll do online play therapy supervision, I have an online play therapy group. And in there, we do a lot of practicing, looking at themes, talking about introducing, talking about how to hold things, talking about what's going on with clients. And one of the things that often comes up when it has to do with prompts is, here's what it is. I'm gonna tell you what they say all the time, and then I'm gonna tell you my response. What they say all the time is, I gave my client the prompt and then it didn't work. And so then I'll usually ask, well, what makes you think it didn't work? And they'll say, well, because they went really concrete. There was no kind of access to the unconscious, so to speak, from a That's one of the therapeutic powers of play. And so I'll say to them, you know what? It did work. It gave you a ton of information. So what information do you think that you got from that? And ultimately, the information that we get from that is that your client may be a concrete thinker. And that might be for a variety of reasons. It might be because they're still not feeling safe. It might be because that's the way their brain processes. And you may want to keep an eye on that because if it has to do with processing and they're very concrete, they might struggle a little bit in school because as they get older cognitively, we should be able to do well, not should, but developmentally, we're able to access higher processing functions like abstract thinking. And if your client is very concrete, especially if you give an art directive to like a teenager and they go super concrete, that's really good information that you want to be curious about what's going on with that. You don't have to say that outside of your head to your clients. I will often keep that inside my head, and gives you really good information. So being open to the possibilities when you give directive prompts, allow them still to use the art making process however they need to use the art making process. The other thing is giving an invitation, meaning you invite them to participate or to engage and use this directive prompt activity. If they choose not to, an invitation by its very nature means they can decline. So if they decline, then you need to let them decline and then move on and do something else. Sometimes, especially in the beginning when I'm getting to know my clients, I'll often give them choices. Like I use the sand tray and art kind of interchangeably, and I'll give them an option. Do you want to, you can do this in the sand tray or you can draw this. And I'm always um, find it interesting which one they choose. And you just kind of hold on to that information and and then see how that progresses over time and what happens over time. So the second thing is then how do you therapeutically hold that art making process? And to me, this is the core of creating and maintaining that free and protected space. Because across pretty much all play therapy models, the foundation across most of the play therapy models is given the free and protected space, your client will move towards healing and wholeness. Given that free and protected space, your client can access those therapeutic powers of play for healing and use those therapeutic powers of play to help them in the healing process. And that includes the way in which they use art. And one of the things that I talk about a lot in the training that I'm doing, it's coming up on Saturday, September 17th, is we talk about how do you hold that therapeutic process. We talk about um, how to identify those themes. We do that through a lot of practice looking at client artwork. The other part of that is the way in which they use those art mediums. So, art mediums are what do you have? What art supplies do you have in your playroom? Different art mediums provide a different experience. And so, um, all of that you're holding though, and you're noticing what's going on, you're using that curiosity. The foundation of play therapy is trust the process. So that in conjunction with making sure you're grounded in your theoretical model. I like using this neuroscience and attachment model when I'm using an integrated approach, which means I'm trusting that if I'm tuned in, if I'm using that attachment and neuroscience lens to understand what's going on with my client and I'm using that to help them access those therapeutic powers of play. I'm kind of noticing which therapeutic powers of play. Usually I do that afterwards. In the session, I'm busy being fully present. But as I'm thinking about it afterwards, kind of processing the session, especially because I have to write my progress notes, and I use that information to help me with my progress notes. Um, that we're holding that process. We're trusting that given that free and protected space, your client will naturally move towards healing and wholeness. We're trusting that they will use those art mediums that work best for them in the moment. Um, and we're kind of holding those possibilities, using that curiosity, using that awareness, using that playfulness, using that acceptance and being fully present. We're holding and maintaining that therapeutic space, and we're seeing what they do over time. We're holding the possibilities of that from session to session to session. And then we're kind of noticing the themes over time. We'll notice where they are in their treatment process. So a lot of that are things that I work with therapists, play therapists in our supervision session, is really honing in on your skills to be able to do that effectively. And then when things come up, what's going on in the session? How do you hold that? What are the decisions you need to make from session to session to session? And with art, it's the same thing. We're kind of holding all of that, noticing that over time, non judgmentally, really holding the possibilities of what's going on in that art making session. And then the third thing is, here's the other question that comes up all the time. We talk about this in the training that I'm doing on the 17th. We talk about this in my supervision. So I thought it would be useful for you guys because this is something that comes up all of the time. How do you explore with them? How do you process with them? What do you say? What do you not say? And to me, this is also kind of brings us into some of the ethics of this projective modality, is making sure that the way in which we show up, the way in which we hold it, the way in which we process it is grounded in theory. And we're able to figure out this is the resonance circuits too, because resonance circuits that Daniel Siegel talks about are the parent's ability to recognize what's mine and what's not mine. So we're looking at, I always kind of refer also to the transference and countertransference, what's going on in that session. So in order to explore and hold, I need to really understand, tune into myself, be aware of myself and what's my client and what's me. The thing with clients, when you're exploring their art with them, we've given the invitation for them to participate. We also need to allow that invitation. They can share as much or as little as they would like to about their art and what they created. So it means if they don't want to share, then they don't have to. We've got to be okay with that. We've got to be able to hold that and respect that they don't need to share, because ultimately it's about what they need. It's not about what I need. And what do I do with that? So if they don't want to share, then they don't have to. There are other ways of understanding, because it is a projective modality. So they don't need to tell you what is going on. We may want them to tell us, but they don't necessarily need to. So the other thing is, you can invite them. You can use curiosity. I'm curious about this. I'm curious about that. You are, sometimes they'll talk throughout the whole art making process. Sometimes they won't. When they're done, I still invite them to share as much or as little as they want to about that process. There are ways in which you can ask questions that are more effective than other ways. A lot of that's what we talk about in the training that I'm doing, and what to do and what not to do. There are some things about that Like if they didn't add it in the drawing, then it's their art. It's their art. This is their unconscious come out onto the paper, essentially. And so we have to respect that. So we can ask questions using curiosity about this or that. And if your model doesn't um, dictate that you tell them what to add in there. I don't know any play therapy models that do, but I don't know them all because I'm only trained in a few of them. Um, but I tend to stay away from saying to somebody, oh, you should add this or you should add that, because that's me inserting myself into their art. So that's kind of a thing you need to think about when you're processing and exploring. One, let them choose what they want to talk about or not talk about. You can use curiosity to explore and make sure you don't insert yourself into their artwork. So that is it for today. So, just kind of a recap. One of the things that I find really useful when I'm using more of an integrated approach with play therapy is I like using a neuroscience and attachment framework. So, the B5 framework is a framework that I came up with using neuroscience and attachment, kind of that informed framework to be fully present, be curious, be playful, be accepting, and be aware of what's going on. And then also, how do you introduce the art making process? You want to use it as an invitation, understanding that your clients may or may not want to engage, and then being okay with what they decide. You can use, depending on what theoretical models you're trained in, you can use art in a non directive way, like in child centered play therapy, that's going to be non directive, or you can use a directive approach. And then, secondly, how do you therapeutically hold that? So, you want to be mindful to create that free and protected space so that your clients can access those therapeutic powers of play. You want to be mindful of being curious. You're going to be kind of holding that. You're the container, that safe container where they can access whatever art mediums they want to access to create what they need to create. And even when you use a directive, it's really about they're going to create whatever it is they need to create. There's no wrong way to do this. You get information about your client even through that art making process and the way they engage in art making, the way they engage with you. And then the last thing is, how do you explore your clients' art projects with them? And in this way, you want to be mindful of this is a projective modality, and there's kind of that ethical piece of understanding what is you and what is your client, being very mindful of not inserting yourself into their art, but allowing them to have the ability to access those therapeutic powers of play, however they need to access those. So it's really about them using the art to help them work through whatever it is they need to work through. You can still do that with some directive um, prompts. Even when you're using directive prompts, so you're still kind of holding the possibilities of whatever it is they need to do in there. You use curiosity, being curious about what they've created, because that allows for invitation. If they don't want to share, they don't have to share. Um, so that's it for today. And if you're interested, I did mention this training that have coming up. It's a live webinar training on Saturday, September 17th. There are still space available. In this training, I'm going to take a look at some of the neuroscience and attachment aspects, Predominantly, it's really going to be about how to help you use art, how to help you understand what's going on in your client's art making process so that you're recognizing those clinical themes, you're learning what to look for and how to hold that, and recognize themes and recognize where your clients are in the healing process. You're also learning about the different art mediums and the different experience that different art mediums have. We'll review a lot of different types of questions and a lot of ways that you can explore with your client what's going on with their art while also making sure that you're holding that container that feels free and protected, because sometimes, and I have seen this happen, where not too often, but I have seen it happen, which is why I really like to do this training, because I really feel like it's important to make sure to know how to process and hold the information. Hi, Shirley. Um, I'm so glad you could join us. So, if you're so in the training, we talk a lot about that, and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of activities for different mental health um, issues that children are dealing with. So if you're interested in that training, you can go to my website. It is rrhcounseling.com/courses. The name of the course is Integrating Art into Play Therapy with Children and Adolescents. It's coming up on Saturday, September 17th. There are CEs available if you need those. And then lastly, if you're interested, I in the B5 framework, I do have a free PDF for that. I will post a link for that in the comments. You can also get that one on my website, rrhcounseling.com/resources. And I will post a link to the training, as well as I'll post a link to the free PDF if you're interested in that. All right, I will see you next time. Bye.